Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Chicago, where we host fireside chats with prominent leaders from Chicago's business community, live on Zoom with Q&A. I am your host, Tim Shum. I'm also the founder and president of our firm, Lucas James Talent Partners. Today on the show, we have Aaron Levy coming on board. Aaron and I go way back. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with him. Before we get into the conversation with Aaron, I just want to highlight some of the other guests that we have for the remainder of May. This Thursday, May 14th, we have Jimmy and Paul from Parker Gale Capital, a private equity firm local here in Chicago, invests solely in mid-market technology companies. They head up their talent, people, culture practice. So they support all of their portfolio companies as it relates to those subjects. Looking forward to having them on the show. Our first jam session is going to be next Tuesday, May 19th, where we have the heads of sales of prominent Chicago technology companies. We got John from Paro, Emma from Built In, Adam from Active Campaign coming on board just to talk everything sales, how these organizations are pivoting as it relates to COVID, all that kind of stuff. So looking forward to that conversation. Next Thursday, the 21st, Julie Novak, founder and CEO of Party Slate. Looking forward to that conversation. She started Party Slate in 2015, I believe, went through the Techstars program, rapid growth. If you're in the event space, you for sure heard of Party Slate. Looking forward to hearing Julie's story. Amanda Lannert, Tuesday, May 26th. She's the CEO of Jellyvision. I would say Jellyvision's probably one of the most well-known technology companies with consistent growth. Amanda at the helm over the last decade or so. And then last but not least, Joe Holberg, founder and CEO of Holberg Financial. Joe is going to talk to us a little bit about personal finance. His whole firm is around personal finance. I think personal finance probably more than ever as it relates to this COVID situation, how this is affecting the economy, families, individuals. We're going to get into that conversation. So looking forward to that. Without further ado, we have Aaron Levy. Aaron is the founder and CEO of his leadership training and development firm called Raise the Bar Consulting. He's also the author of Open, Honest, and Direct, which came out last summer. We're going to talk about that. He's also a mentor at 1871, a mentor and contributor at Forbes Coaches Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Levy. What's going on, Aaron?
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I know you have a busy schedule. I know we probably grab coffee or a call or lunch every couple of months or so. We've been doing Zooms recently, but I started this just to talk shop and business with people that I like talking shop and business with. You're definitely one of those individuals. So I'm glad to have you on the show for sure.
Oh, it's fun to be on. We chat a bunch and have really good conversations. So I'm glad we're able to kind of like expand that conversation to more people and chat.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got some attendees. We got some people that are going to be listening on the podcast. For those that don't know of you or your firm or your book, why don't you give a little backstory about all three, and then we'll get into some questions for you.
Yeah. And I think the best backstory is I've just been really curious about why when people know better, don't they do better? Why don't we move from knowledge to action rapidly, effectively, efficiently? And where I've seen that the most prominent is there's thousands of leadership books out there. There's tons of podcasts, and a lot of us know what we're supposed to do, but we're not really sure how to do it. And what I've seen consistently over the years and in my work with thousands of leaders has been most leaders and most managers suck. And I created Raise the Bar to kind of change that. I don't believe it's any manager or leader's fault. I really think it's when we grow, we move someone from a top performer into a leader of people, and those are very different skill sets. Right? Being really good at what you do doesn't make you really good at leading others. And so we really set people up for failure most of the time. And Raise the Bar was designed around how do we change that dynamic? How do we create a workplace where managers are coaches, where managers help unlock the potential of their people and really enable their people to be at their best. And when that happens, everybody wins. And so Raise the Bar was built on that foundation, and I wrote Open, Honest, and Direct also along those lines, and even have our podcast, the Open, Honest, and Direct podcast, which you were on, Tim, along those lines of how do we create a world where managers are better coaches for their people?
Very good. Now talk to us a little bit about some of the trainings, the boot camps, some of your actual work, and then what are the types of companies that are part of your portfolio of clients?
Yeah, so I was a first-time manager when I went through training to become a coach. And training to become a coach, a certified ICF coach, is pretty intense. I think it's like 200 hours, and we did it over 6 months. And I'm going through this. I'm a director of a team. I'm leading a small team or a good-sized team. And as I'm going through this to be a coach, I'm thinking to myself, oh crap! Like this is something that's impactful for me and life changing in the way in which I show up as a coach for other people and other leaders, but even more impactful for how I show up with my team. Like this is a big deal. How do I get this into people's hands in a more digestible, condensable way? Because people really need this. We need this. And so we took the core components of coaching and brought those directly into a manager training that was done over 3 or 6 months. And so our trainings are 3 or 6 months long, and to optimize and make sure people are able to actually form habits and deliberately practice, which is what we focus on. We have a training followed by a homework assignment, followed by a coaching session. And then a couple weeks later, we have the next training followed by a homework assignment and coaching session. So each of our trainings, done virtually and live, they have you practice just one skill. And then you go into the real world and you practice it with your team. And then you talk with your coach and you work on what worked and what didn't work, all along the lines of really building the habits to make you a better leader. And so we've been doing that for about 3.5 years, and we've graduated 200 plus open, honest, and direct certified leaders. So through our training, we certify leaders. And we work with companies like Showpad and Hierology and Load Delivered and Tempest, and just a lot of the fast-growing startups in Chicago have come through our boot camp at some point. I would say there's a good portion of them. Reverb have all at least sent somebody through our boot camp over the last couple of years. And it's just a really good way for companies that are fast-growing to say, hey, I want to make sure that you have the tools and skills to develop and become a better leader.
I'm a huge proponent of leadership development, not only for companies of all shapes and sizes, but for my company, for myself. I think we've all had a really good manager and a good leader, and then on the flip side, we've all had a very poor manager and leader, and kind of seen the effects of kind of both. I came from, and we've talked about this before, I came from an organization that started with a couple people in a basement. It's privately held today. It has 10,000 internal employees over a 30-year stretch, just lather, rinse, repeat, growth until they became one of the top companies in a very, very large segment. And there's certain areas that were part of the secret sauce. And I could go into repeatable sales strategies and operations and all this kind of stuff. But one of them was training and development was a key. It was a core value. It was external trainings. It was internal kind of corporate trainings where we would send everybody to the corporate location for trainings all the time. There was external trainings at each branch location. There was train the trainer. So once I got into leadership, I was training every day, and every which way you looked, there was training and development. I left that organization and became a consultant independently, and I started working with small and medium-sized businesses. And one of the first things that I noticed is that aspect was missing from a lot of these organizations. As fast companies rapidly grew, and the founder, owner, CEO had middle level managers that were hired within the past year or two, mixed messages, different mission, vision, core values. If they didn't have that training and development element, everything was kind of amok. And a lot of the small businesses, you walk into them, and if the leader didn't come from an environment like that, you never know what you're kind of walking into as an employee. Maybe speak to that. You have a lot of experience working with companies large and small. You mentioned some of the rapidly growing companies here in Chicago. Without maybe naming some of your clients or stories, what would you speak to that in terms of your experiences working with some of these organizations?
Yeah, well, one, we've seen as the very large organizations, because they're large, they realize this is a big issue, and they invest, and they have entire departments and organizations. Like McDonald's has a hamburger university. and they were one of our past clients at a previous company that I worked at. And right, a Hamburg university, so every single manager, they have 8 across the world, right? Every single manager has to go through a week of training with them. And so once you get to a certain size, it just becomes so important to make sure you develop consistency in how your people and leaders show up. But when you go from, 1 to 30, and then 30 to 60, and then 60 to 120, and then you're at 240, and you're growing up. And so what we find is these growing pains, companies feel in a lot of different ways, right? CEOs, executives, and Tim, I know we've talked about this before. It goes from kind of like steering a small sailboat to now steering a fleet of ships. And you can't just make one turn and everybody turns with you. You need to actually be able to communicate, be able to give clarity and context and make sure people feel safe and are willing to go on this journey with you. And what we find is in this kind of growing up maturation phase of businesses, they're trying to get all their processes in order. They're still selling and hitting traction. And their leaders are people who, as you said, they are promoted really quickly. They don't have the tools or skills. They're asked to do their job and then also make sure their employees do their job. And they're just not set up to lead well. And the intention isn't there around how we actually have conversations, how we lead. A lot of the times these organizations are just setting up even their expectations for what does it mean to manage well here. Oftentimes that's what we end up coming in and doing before we start anything is we get clear on them is what does it mean to lead at Lucas James? What are our expectations of our managers and our leaders? How do we measure that? And then it's like, what are the core set of skills? What's that like toolkit that I want everybody, every manager and leader at Lucas James to hold? And so we kind of come in and we're that foundational level of training to make sure, one, everybody on your team has the same exact training, same level of, same toolkit that they're walking around with. They're using the same common language, which is incredibly important to have a common language amongst your team and your company. And 3, they're building the skills. So the 2 things I was just talking to a client yesterday is, hey, we're not going to determine what are all the operational things, the tactical things that each of your managers have to do on a daily basis. What we're going to do is we're going to say, what are the skills that your people need so that they can show up in every situation better? And so we focus on how do you listen with intention and attention? How do you ask powerful questions as a means to be a more strategic and thoughtful leader? How do you give and receive feedback? How do you hold critical conversations? These skills are skills that put people and set people up for success, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the scenario. So they're not having to look back at their manual and say, okay, this is the scenario that my employee gave me. What do I do? No, they naturally know to be present in the conversation, to ask a powerful question, to uncover what's really behind the issue that an employee came to them with, and to be willing to give the feedback to an employee that's a gift to say, hey, this is working or this isn't working, Tim.
That's so true. You brought up a lot of good points there. And I feel like, and I know that we share a lot of the same client profile, right? So, we're the outsourced kind of recruiting function. You're helping the leaders and the C-level kind of training and development. They're all trying to move towards this direction of growth. And some companies are growing like crazy wicked fast, especially if they're getting fundraising that's, doubling their headcount in a period of 6 months, all this kind of stuff. But what are some gaps that you see in some of these just rapidly growing technology companies where it might look warm and fuzzy on the outside, good PR, they're, check insights on LinkedIn, they're growing, but maybe you check their Glassdoor reviews and everything under the hood is kind of a muck.
Yeah, I would say odds are if you're a fast growing company, there's going to be a muck going on. There's going to be a mess. No matter how thoughtful and intentional your founders and leaders are and how good your people are, it's a mess because to grow that rapidly, like explosive growth, causes problems and breaks things. And sometimes that's good, and other times it just causes challenges for people in the way they work, because at that kind of like the tendencies that we see are, one, they're just trying to get their processes in order, right? You have to establish different processes, onboarding processes, hiring processes, goal setting processes, goal tracking processes, performance review processes, bonus structures, aligning job roles and job titles. because up until 100 employees, we just gave people job titles to make them feel happy and good. But now we have VPs, directors, senior VPs, and then we have a C-suite, and then we have senior managers, and they don't all match up. And so those are the things you kind of, once you get to this like rapid growth where either your business has been validated by people who are funding you, or validated by the market in a way in which you're able to grow that fast, that your head kind of goes from facing forward and looking out at your market or looking out at your funders for, anywhere between, 1 and 8 years, let's say,
Sure.
to now having to say, hey, we actually need to look inwards at our processes, at how we train, at how we set ourselves up for success, because we have to take care of ourselves so that this system of people can operate in a healthy fashion and be able to take on more challenges, more growth, more pressures and variables. And so that's kind of a consistent theme we see is processes are broken. We need to, our team is not ready to look inward, but we need to look inward. Or we're just thinking about it, but it's like a kind of a slow move for us to say, hey, we actually did change. And Tim, you and I know, right, we've put all of our energy into growing and selling and building. And at a certain point, we're going to have to turn our energy and say, we need to look internally. Even if we're good, thoughtful leaders ourselves, you still move fast and need to realize that stuff that you put in place is probably going to be broken.
That's a really good way of looking at it. I feel like it's that inflection point of looking externally versus internally where things can either rapidly accelerate for the positive and the better, and growth can continue, or the wheels start kind of coming off and it's impacting growth in a negative way. What's your thought on, I've thought a lot about this, the founder, owner, CEO types, the C-level team that came from a large organization with infrastructure, with a lot of the things that you're mentioning, versus the founding team that maybe didn't have that experience before, started their business right out of college, or maybe it's the third business, in their late 20s, things like that. What have you seen as that relates to how that mentality maybe trickles down to the organization through growth?
I think first and foremost, I'll address that. First and foremost, what we see is, one, the founder is the source of your culture. The founder is the source of where your people spend their energy. No matter what you put around them, or how you try and protect from the way in which they act or behave in a good way or a bad way, the founder is the source of the culture. That just is, they created it, and that it emanates from who they are into the decisions you make as a business, and those decisions kind of trickle down. The most important thing is that as a founder, you're willing to embrace what I call a beginner's mindset, which is knowing that you don't have all the answers, being willing to be wrong, challenging yourself and having your team challenge you. Because when you do that, then you start to see the signs. So the good founders that I see are the ones who see the signs, whether an employee keeps them in check, and Tim, I think we talked about this last week, or somebody else points something out and they realize, oh shoot, I need to really rethink how I'm approaching X, Y, or Z, or how I'm engaging with my direct reports or my leadership team. And so that's the most important thing by far, is, are they open, willing to grow, to change, and keep a beginner's mindset? Because if they are, then they're going to hear the input from, frontline manager or frontline employee just as much as they're going to hear it from their CFO or their chief people officer. What the difference between is you asked, like a founder who's had the experience of working at a Fortune 500 and now, branched off and started their own company, versus somebody who's, out of college or, worked at some small company and now branching off on their own, is the one who's worked at a large company likely has a playbook that they've seen, right? They're a little more methodical about their playbook for their business. It doesn't mean that they don't forget steps or their playbook is perfect. It just means they have some sort of a plan set in place, whereas kind of first-time founders are learning everything new as they go. I don't necessarily think one is better than the other from my experience. I kind of like the first-time founders that are open and willing, because then they're constantly innovating and changing. Whereas if you've seen it before, I worked at KPMG and this is how we did it, and so this is how we're going to do it, you're not innovating. And I've also seen the opposite, where first-time founders are like, this is, I know how to succeed because I brought us from scratch, and my only success is this business, but I know how it works, and I'm not willing to change or adjust to take us to the next level because what got us here is going to get us there. And they're just not ready to realize that what got us here won't get us there. So, more seasoned, worked at a larger company before, has a playbook. First-time founders don't necessarily have a playbook. And then there's a lot of founders that are like consultants that have playbooks, but not necessarily haven't seen it run in a business. They've seen it from their perspective, how they've implemented into other businesses, which is an interesting perspective too.
Yeah, I feel like you mentioned a couple different things throughout our talk. It trickles down from the founder, culture, growth, all those things. You were just talking about the experiences that the founder had may shape the way that they go into their business, and then how that culture is shaped. What about I don't want to say temperaments, but I guess the ability for founders, the C-level leader that you're working with, to understand their strengths and areas of improvement, and the willingness to change those, versus I'm sure that there's a negative impact on the ability for you to do your job with a client, if they're not open, honest, and direct, as the title of your book states.
Yeah, if a founder's not open, honest, and direct, they're probably not going to be a client. Even if their people team is really great or their COO is really great, they're just probably not going to be a client, because we can't enact the overall company change that's needed. We can't actually help them go towards their goals if they're not willing to look at themselves and assess, hey, I have opportunities here. And so that's kind of like one of our first indicators when we have conversations, and we talk to and coach and work with CEOs on a daily basis. And the three things that I say every CEO should have is, one, every CEO should have a coach. They should have somebody that's your mirror to help you see your blind spots. And the great thing about a coach is there's someone who says, my commitment is to your goal, is not to making you feel good. So I'll tell you something that you might not want to hear because nobody else in your life does. Most often people don't tell us the things that make us feel uncomfortable because they don't want to feel uncomfortable telling you. And a coach will do that and hold you accountable to your goal. And so that's one. Two is kind of like what I say, a tribe of mentors. So people that you look up to that have either done what you want to do before or who are experts in certain areas that you can grab coffee, grab lunch with, pick their brain, get on a phone call, ask questions. And oftentimes they'll also be people that will point out blind spots or say, hey, at this point, notice or prepare for X, Y, and Z to happen because I've seen that before when I scaled my company. So a tribe of mentors that you can learn from. And the last one is a peer group. A group of people, kind of how we operate, where you can just share and discuss things. And we've texted and called through this crisis and have been able to have each other to just like vent, right? Because you don't, as a founder or CEO, you don't have that with really anybody else in your organization. And oftentimes your partner at home, if you have one, doesn't really want to hear you talk about work all the time when you're spending all the time talking about work when you're there. And so it's having other people to share, to vent with, to just like let yourself relax, and also learn from what they're doing, what they're trying. Those are the three things. So coach, tribe of mentors, and a peer group. That's like the first thing I recommend to any CEO or founder to have. If you don't have those, like go out and find those and start to build that for yourself, because that you need as a founder or CEO or even a C-suite executive, you need that kind of sanity check for yourself.
So well said. But by the way, attendees, we'll take maybe one or two more questions. So if you have a question for Aaron, we're going to get to those in a second. I felt we talked about this, maybe a chat that we've had previously, just around some of the variables that could positively or negatively impact the relationship between a supervisor and an employee. So we had talked about, the psychological size of the supervisor, whether it's like a frontline manager or a founder, owner, CEO. Probably super important that the founder, owner, CEO, because of that trickle down effect, does that correctly. So the psychological size, the ability to accept feedback that could be constructive, or or the lack thereof of the ability to do that. There's certain variables that you almost need to create an environment that it's okay for somebody to come up to you, regardless of who it is, say, hey, do you have a couple minutes? Assuming that they do it respectfully, give you feedback on how you're doing, just like you would expect them to take the feedback that you're giving. Maybe speak to that a little bit in some of the things that you've seen when you've been working with some of your clients.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. When you're a 2-person team or a 5-person company or a working group, that's just scrappy and getting things done, you're going back and forth with people. You're sharing what's working, what's not working. You're making adjustments. You're communicating in the moment. And right when those teams are the teams that are like high performing and thriving, they're ones that are open, honest, and direct with one another. And they're not using or worrying about politics. They're just moving forward. And so as you grow and expand, the politics come into play and the stories and what do we mean. But the goal is how do we continue to create that environment, that space where people can be open with each other, where they can be direct with each other, where they can share what they're seeing and feeling. And as a leader, your responsibility is to create that space by giving them clarity, right? So the 3 things I say any leader is responsible for is clarity on where we're going, what we're doing, how we're going to get there, or an idea of how we're going to get there. Context of why are we going there? What's the point? What's in it for me? What's in it for our business? What's the, for us at Raise the Bar, the vision is create a workplace like where all managers are coaches, right? That's where we're going. And how we're going to get there, we're going to take incremental steps. And then the last thing is psychological safety. People need to feel safe to be able to speak up, to be able to ask questions, to be able to share their thoughts without getting ridiculed or made fun of or put down, so that you can move effectively and efficiently. All this is like, so you can move and be efficient as a team, not just so people can feel good. That's a side effect. The benefit is when you're able to move and communicate quickly together on the problems, you're able to overcome and innovate much faster, be more creative. That's why, the things that we're seeing right now are leaders are saying, how do I get my team engaged? How do I get them inspired? How do I get them performing? How do I get them innovating? Well, that comes from how do you use the skills that we work on to set your team up for success? And that starts with how you show up, how you communicate, and how you are consistent with them in your actions on a daily basis.
That's a very clear and concise way of putting a lot of the experiences that I've had over my career. I went from independent contributor, just having to worry about Tim, little promotion to maybe managing 5 or 6 people, right? Grew that to maybe like 8 or 10. That was a huge shift, a huge eye opener. I wish we were talking during those days. Hate to say it, there's probably some sacrificial lambs that did not enjoy working for Tim during those times. I feel like until, I went from managing that smaller team to about 50, 60 or so, which then grew larger, until I realized what you're talking about right there, that you have to kind of let your guard down, that you don't have all the answers. If people understand that you're trying to get better, you respect and hold their feedback and ideas in high regard, and there's no dumb questions. Be open. The door's always open. Once I realized that and let my guard down a little bit, and when I was getting some of this constructive feedback on a bunch of different things, Tim needs to get better at this, that, and the other, where I went, okay, this person's probably right. And if they're thinking it, other people are probably thinking it. And I need to get to the root of that, because I might have some blind spots as a leader, and I'm not anywhere where I want or need to be. And I think it's always everybody's journey, regardless of if you're the founder, CEO of a company, or you're managing a small team. But some of these concepts, without thinking that you got all the answers, it's just going to stunt growth over time. And I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And it's, what I would say is we talked about a lot of things, but it's really, if you pick one thing and focus on getting a little bit better at it, and that's what we talk about, if you can get a little bit better at it, you actually have a profound impact. And I say this on the first day of any one of our trainings is small changes taken consistently over time make a profound impact. It's not like you're going to change everything that you do. It's actually a couple of small changes, but it's building them into consistent habits. So it's not just something you tell me on Monday, but then show me something different on Wednesday in the way you act. It's you tell me on Monday, you identify it and show me on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And that's how I know you're doing what you say you're going to do.
The flavor of the month, the flavor of the week, as I always call it. You could read 10 different leadership books and there's going to be a million ideas. You can't implement them all. You could get a bunch of different coaches. You can't implement them all at the same time. In my experience, you've had to pick maybe 2 or 3 and stay consistent with it, set reminders for yourself, get good at it, get that feedback loop kind of going before moving on to the next. It's almost like you have to get bite sizes of integration into your operating rhythm before anything's going to take effect.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it. And I think one of the secrets that we talk about is deliberate practice. In order to build a habit, you need deliberate practice. And so that means practice with live feedback, practice with real feedback on what's working, what's not working. And that's what we work to institute and implement, so that, it's not just that people leave saying, oh, that was fun or that was nice. They leave saying, oh, I'm different fundamentally in the way in which I show up.
Absolutely. Aaron, we're a little bit over time. We have time for one question. I'm just going to rattle it off to you if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
We have Amanda Schleedy that asks, it seems that a lot of your training is based on conscious leadership. Have you integrated conscious leadership and other training programs in what you bring to companies? I might add to that, have there been influences in the way that you think about leadership and management?
Oh my God, there have been hundred. Like I wish I could show you. I have like this reading list, influence list of TED Talks, of books, of studies, all the way to behavioral economics, from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, to Why We Do What We Do by Ed Detchy, and conscious leadership. I've been a part of conscious capitalism for a bit of time, and was a part of the Chicago chapter for a little bit. And so yes, all of these things have a profound impact on how we think about and deliver our trainings. And what I'll say is, we really try to narrow down the different models and methodologies to make it simple for people. So most people won't know all of what goes into our training, because if we led with data and science or principles from all these different places, that would make us sound smart, but that wouldn't actually help you or anybody on your team do anything differently. And so we actually try and really make it as simple and as clear as possible, because the work that we do with leaders and developing the skills is simple, but it's not easy. And so we want to make it as simple as possible so they can do it, as opposed to making it complex and hard. Right now we're making it simple and challenging.
Speaking specifically to conscious leadership, Amanda, I went through some conscious leadership training with a coach that I had previously, and I loved it. I feel like and Aaron, maybe you could speak to this too, or some variation of this. Conscious leadership to me was really looking inward at yourself as an individual before you look inward at yourself as a leader, and then how you show up as a leader. And when I was working with this coach on conscious leadership, it almost felt like a professional therapy session is probably the best way to put it. I've had coaches in the past. I'm open to it. It might not be for everyone. I think it should be for everybody. But a lot of the stuff that I learned there is how you react to certain things that happen both externally and internally. When you show up to work, being present in the moment. When you show up at home, being present in the moment. And I have so many takeaways from my time there that it wouldn't have shown up in like a book necessarily. So Aaron, maybe just last question, speak to, some of the, psychological, feeling-based IQ versus EQ stuff that you see with leaders that could have a much more positive impact than, say, any sort of management training tips that you could give a person.
Yeah, it's actually at the foundation of all that we do, is how you see yourself, and also the impact that you're looking to have on others and the world. We talk about it as your commitment. The commitment is kind of one of the things that we get to right away, because it's the bedrock for how you show up truthfully, in any relationship, in any culture, in any organization. But we bring it into the context. It's how you show up as a leader for your team. And in order to show up at your best, you need to look inwardly to yourself. You need to get clear on what's really important to you. Because when you do that, that's your motivation. And there's a bunch of science behind it, but also conscious leadership is really focused on that. You need to be clear on that so that that is your driver and your motivation for how you show up in other ways. And so we really go to the root for each of these skills of what will trigger a habit for you, and also what is a blind spot that holds you back from actually adopting that habit. And there's a lot of those, as you said, looking inward to yourself in conscious leadership is I would say it's the main theme and the bedrock of what we do, but it's also across all of the skills that we train. Is you have to look at yourself first, because change only happens once you're first aware. If you're not aware, you can't change anything. So the first step in habit formation, behavior change, is awareness. Then it's trying something new, right? Or determining what you're going to do next. And then it's building and repeating.
Very well said. As usual, Aaron, I've always enjoyed just talking shop. I think all of our coffee meetings, phone conversations, Zooms go like this. I'm just very thankful and fortunate that we could bring some of the other attendees and listeners on. For those that don't know you, want to reach out to you, where can they find you? Where can they find Raise the Bar?
Yeah, they can go to raisebar.co. They can also go to the book website, openhonestanddirect.com, where they can find me on LinkedIn, or the book's on Amazon, and it should have all the places you can find me.
That's great. Aaron, thanks so much for carving out some time for us today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Tim.